Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very privileged to be invited here. Thank you very much for the invitation. And we heard some really touching speeches by other speakers. It really feels good to be back in a school environment. I really missed it, with all its pros and cons. I'm a tombak player. This instrument that you'll see in a moment, it's an Iranian instrument. It's a goblet drum. I'm originally from Iran, from Kurdistan. And I moved to India when I was 14 years old. And I'm 30 now. So I've spent 16 years in India and 14 years in Iran, which means I'm 2 years more Indian than I'm Iranian now. Until 28, it was 50-50, but now it's 60-40. I started playing tombak from my uncle at the age of 7, and before that, I had started doing gymnastics at the age of 5. So learning the tombak was it happened very naturally. My uncle, my maternal family, they're mostly into art. My grandfather is a cook as well as a musician, so he had 2 sons. One became a cook and one became a musician. So we always had good food and good music at home. It happened very naturally. It was really out of curiosity. I was always watching my uncle play the instrument and I was really fascinated by it. So I started learning from my uncle, and at the age of 14, I had already been playing maybe 6-7 months before moving to India. In one of the gymnastic tournaments, I fell down from the high bar and I broke my right arm in 3 places. And that literally meant starting over with the instrument, because it was a very bad break. And immediately after that, 6 months after that, we moved to India, and I was disconnected from my gurus, from my ustads, from whom I was learning. So when I was in India, in the beginning, I was really feeling lost. I was feeling like I couldn't relate to anything, because I was always thinking about how am I going to be able to move on with my music training while all my gurus and all my ustads are in Iran. But one thing I realized was, obviously it took a couple of years, but one thing I realized is that there is always a way to find your path than the conventional thinking that you set in your mind, that this is my way and this is how I'm going to carry my journey forward. I started listening to Indian music, and by the time I was 18, my family decided to move back to Iran, and I had already started learning Indian music. So the Fakhroddin who came to India, who was impatient in the first years, asking himself what is he going to do with his tombak training, now his family wants to move back when he's 18, and he's saying Mene Arao. So I stayed in India and I started learning Indian music, and I was still in touch with my ustads. I was learning by myself. The incident that happened to my hand meant that I had to almost start over with my training. But patience was something that I realized really gives back to you, especially when it comes to music. And looking everywhere else also, not really always thinking about your own training and your own music. So I started looking into the Indian instrument tabla, and I started listening to Indian rhythms. And then I found my own identity while playing the tombak. And that's how I think you can really take something forward, especially when it comes to music. I'm pretty much talking about music and specifically tombak. To be able to take forward the tradition, you really need to look elsewhere. But one thing that's very important is that you have to always go back to your roots also, and don't forget where you come from and what your main trainings were and what were the initial trainings. And practicing like 5 hours, 7 hours, sometimes 10 hours a day. The most boring things really, like just repetition after repetition. But the patient was something that really gave back to it. So whatever you're doing, whatever your passion is, or whatever you think is going to be your profession, you have to stay in the moment. You have to think about the now, not the tomorrow. Because now is yesterday's tomorrow. So just stay in the present and have patience and have faith, and you'll keep going forward. You'll keep going forward without even realizing it. I'm now going to play a little bit of tombak for you, and I'll also speak about the instrument a bit. So as I was saying, practicing is really something that can be boring. Last year I had to go through a back surgery because of sitting a lot. I started having some problems in my lower back, and I had to go through a surgery, and it's reoccurring now. But patience and really being, you have to be a fighter, you know, and you have to be a fighter now for the better tomorrow. So I'm going to show you, I'm going to demonstrate a little bit. For example, one of the things that I was practicing, right? It's a very boring thing, but what comes out of it, out of repetition, is excellence. And that's a very important thing. You may feel like you're bored now of what you're doing, but if you keep at it, you'll become the better one tomorrow. So this, check. Okay, can everyone hear me? So this is what I would be doing when I'm practicing. When I'm learning tombak, when I was 5 or 6. And I'm just thinking, this is so boring. My uncle is asking me to do this for 2 hours a day, just like this. But out of practicing, Now, if I hadn't what I was trying to say earlier, by staying true to your roots and always going back to your roots, not sticking to the roots, not sticking on the roots, but going back to give yourself a reminder of where you are coming from. Whatever I played was Iranian music, Persian music. But I looked into tabla, I looked into Indian rhythms, and I wouldn't be able to play what I'm going to give you a very short demonstration of how tabla and how Indian music has influenced my tombak playing. But still, I am also playing Iranian music because that's where the identity of this instrument is. So staying true with your identity, but also at the same time looking elsewhere, I think is a very good way of breaking the barriers, because you want to break the barriers in a meaningful way. Otherwise, everybody can come up with anything that's been happening for the first time, but it has to be something meaningful, especially when it comes to music. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.